everyone, my name is Kelly, and for my project today I'm going to be cooking a coconut cream pie. And what I'm actually testing here is two different methods of making meringue. On page 242, Courier talks about how to keep your meringue from beading, and what she says is the cause of that is overcooking because the proteins tighten and expel water, and that's what causes the beads on the outside. So her remedy for that is to actually cook it at a high temperature for a short amount of time. I think she said 425 for 4 to 5 minutes. And so when I read that, I was interested to find that in her recipes, she calls for cooking the pies at a low temperature, 325, for 30 minutes, which is quite a long time. And in the text, she said that that's not actually preferred because the longer cooking time will also dry out the proteins and cause beading. And I understand that you may want to do that to prevent salmonella, but she's using a safe meringue recipe that's supposed to kill salmonella, so I didn't really see the purpose for that. So what I'm going to be doing today is cooking the meringue according to her recipe for 30 minutes at 325, but I'm also going to test the other method that she suggested, which is only cooking it for 4 to 5 minutes, but at 425 degrees. And I'm going to compare whether or not beading occurs and the texture and the taste of those two different meringues. And so today I'm using a coconut cream recipe out of the Southern Living magazine. It calls for half a cup of granulated sugar, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. I'm using the Argo brand. 2 cups of half and half, which I didn't have, so I'll actually be making with heavy cream and milk. 4 egg yolks, 3 tablespoons of butter, 1 cup of coconut, and 2½ teaspoons of vanilla, which I have the McCormick Pure Vanilla. And then for my meringue, I'm going to be using the Safe Meringue recipe on 196. The only change I'm making there is I'm substituting white vinegar for cream of tartar because I couldn't find that in the grocery store. So as you've seen in the book, white vinegar is a substitute that you can use. So I've got some water simmering right now to start my safe meringue method, and we'll start mixing those ingredients. Here I've got 12 egg whites since I'm making a double batch. I was very careful to not get any yolk in there, and the yolks I'll use later for my filling. I've also washed all my utensils really well with hot water because any contaminating yolk or oil will just make the meringue break down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the egg yolks to this sugar, water, and vinegar. I'm going to stir it kind of gently because we don't want it to foam at this point because foam cooks at a lower temperature. So I'm going to mix those together, and then I'm going to heat it over this simmering water until it reaches 160 degrees. And the point of that is to kill any salmonella. So I'll start mixing these. Alright, so the water is simmering. It's at 180 degrees. So I'm going to put this bowl of egg whites on top, and we're going to stir it gently with a rubber spatula for a minute or so until it reaches 160 degrees. We'll probably need to hold that because it looks like it will overflow. So I got my egg whites up to 160 with constant stirring, and a few little pieces have cooked through, which I don't think is good, but I'm going to try whipping these up and see what their texture is like. I've moved my meringue to a larger bowl because it is whipping up really well. It's very fluffy, so I'm going to keep whipping until the egg whites at the bottom are incorporated, and we've got some peaks that stay. My meringue has whipped up nicely. It's holding some soft peaks, and it just slides a little bit in the bowl. So now what I'm doing is letting a cornstarch and water mixture sit. These swollen starch granules are going to add some stability to my meringue. So after heating those, I'm going to stir them into my meringue. My cornstarch mixture has thickened, so now I'm going to add it to my egg whites and whisk it in pretty slowly. Meringue after adding the salt and vanilla and all the cornstarch. So it's holding some peaks and it doesn't slide around in the bowl very much. And since I've added sugar, I don't really have to worry about letting it sit and lose moisture. So I'm going to let this sit while I make up my filling. For the filling, I have 4 cups of half and half and 8 egg yolks mixed together. And I'm going to be pouring that into a mixture of 1 cup of sugar and half a cup of cornstarch. This was better. This looks really yellow and creamy. It looks really good. I'm stirring until this comes to a boil, and then I'm going to boil it for about 3 minutes until it thickens. And I'm also boiling it because we want to deactivate the amylase enzyme so that once our filling is in the pie, the enzyme doesn't break down the starch and make it watery. It's been heating for about 5 minutes, and although it hasn't boiled yet, I can tell that it's starting to thicken a little bit. 5 minutes later, and it's significantly thicker, and it's starting to boil now. I'm going to take it off because it's pretty thick, and it reached 148 degrees, I believe. Here's my filling with the rest of the ingredients added, the butter and the coconut. It smells great, it tastes great, and so while it's still hot, I'm going to put it in the pie crust, which I admit are pre-made because one, I didn't have time and to make new ones because mine didn't turn out so great, so use those pre-made ones. So I'm going to spoon these into the crust and then put the meringue on top, and then we'll get back to it. So now the pies are filled up and we're spooning on the meringue. Right now I have the oven preheating to 425, and I'm going to cook the pie for just 4 to 5 minutes. I'm going to watch it really closely just to see when it starts browning, and then I'll take it out. And as we're adding the meringue, it's important to make sure it completely covers the top and touches the crust all the way around so that it doesn't pull back when it's baking. So we'll get those all covered up and the first one in the oven. I've got this one in the oven at 425, and I'll put it in there for 4 to 5 minutes at least, but I'll keep an eye on it to see when the meringue starts browning. One variable that I didn't really take into account in this experiment is how long the other pie would be sitting while this one was baking. So that's one mistake I made, but I only have one oven, so we'll see how they compare. After 4 minutes, the very tip tops are toasted, but I'll let it go just a little longer to get a more even toasting. Here it is after about 6 minutes, and I think it looks quite pretty. And at the risk of making it not look pretty, but for the sake of science, I'm interested to see if I can get a temperature on the meringue. It's not really rising. Must not be over. It's about up to 120. So it appears that this method does not get the meringue hot enough to kill salmonella. Thankfully, we use the safe meringue method. So now I've let the oven cool to 325, and we're going to put this one in for 30 minutes or until it's about as brown as that one, and we'll keep track. For about 15 minutes. This first pie is so weepy that the water is almost spilling over. I don't know if you can see all that. So I was gonna let it cool on the counter here until the other one was done. It has 17 minutes. So we'll see what happens with that. On the left is the pie that cooked at 325 for 30 minutes. It's much more evenly browned. And I don't know if this is really an effective method to test the temperature with a meat thermometer. I'll try this one again and see if it registers anything. It's going up much higher than the first one did. 130. It looks to be about 136. And 38. To be consistent, I'm going to let this one on the left sit out for 30 minutes as well. This one, I don't know if you can tell, but it is literally running over with syrup. So now I'm going to cool this one on the right in a fridge for a couple of hours actually, uncovered like the recipe calls for. And then after these cool in the fridge, you can cut into them and see what they're both like. This pie is a little weepy also, but I'm going to go ahead and cool it as the recipe calls for. They've both been in the fridge for about 5 hours now, and on this one that was cooked at a low and slow temperature, there's some beading. You can see on the edges there. It's pretty noticeable. On this one, there's a little bit, but it's not as noticeable overall. So right now it appears that cooking it hot and quick may have been helpful. A big problem though is that they're still very weepy. You can see all that liquid in there. The meringue actually kind of slides around a little bit. And I don't know if that's what you'd call so much weeping, but I'm afraid what happened is that I didn't cook the filling long enough and hot enough to deactivate the amylase enzyme, and so I think that's that starch breakdown that they were talking about. So I poured some of that liquid off and cut into both of them. They looked a lot better on the inside than I expected them to. And the crust held up better than I expected. So we'll give them a taste. That was good, and still a lot thicker than I expected. That one was maybe just a little bit thinner. Yeah, they're about the same actually. They both taste pretty good. Some final notes after finishing both of them. They're pretty similar in taste. The crust held up really well too. It's not, I wouldn't even call it soggy. It's still very crunchy, so that's good. The meringue is a lot more airy than I'm used to. It's just really fluff. Which that just may be a matter of preference if you wanted to make a harder meringue. So, they turned out surprisingly well. The only thing I would change is getting the starch or the filling to a higher temperature to deactivate the amylase enzyme. And I'm going to do a little research on that and probably make a comment on my video once I figure out what temperature that would be.